Okay, so first I want to just thank everybody who basically is listening to this recorded webinar here. So anyway, going to talk a little bit just about myself. So my name is Tony Vieira. I'm one of the technical trainers here at Carlisle, and I'm really one of two technical trainers. So there's myself, and then there's also an individual named Greg Tate. And then there's our manager. Her name is Ariel Andreev. So it is a full-time gig, basically, for training with us. Basically, this content that's pulled for this particular webinar is part of our CREW curriculum, which essentially CREW stands for Continued Roofing Education and Workshops Trainings. And these are 1 through 500 level trainings that we offer. And most of the content for this webinar has been pulled from our 101 level training that we offer. So some of it from the 201, but mostly from the 101. And these CREW trainings are essentially in-person trainings that we offer here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, really designed for classroom and hands-on learning of products and accessories. Currently, given the situation, we're not doing these trainings, the in-person trainings, I mean. But when things get back up and running, and they will, we'll be continuing those. So hopefully, these will give a little bit of a glance at what we have to offer here at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, if you want to come check out our facility. Because the best way to learn is definitely by seeing, and a lot of these, as I said, are hands-on classes where you can actually apply the products and see them yourself. So again, that is the best way to learn. But moving on real quick here, at the very end, we'll go a little bit into some additional courses that we're going to start unleashing via webinar as well. So, but to get started on the next slide here, just give me 1 second. Systems. So talking about the different main systems will help to give a better understanding really of insulation and its installation as we go through the subsequent slides in this webinar. So what you'll see, just real quick, we're going to keep these very brief and simple. The adhered roof system that you see on the left-hand side, that is essentially, so it's important to know that we name the system based on the way that the membrane is secured. And that's, so system really is the key word there. So when the membrane is actually secured via adhesive, for example, we refer to that as an adhered system. If the membrane is secured with ballast, for example, you can see that's generally done with rock. And that rock is sized according to specifications, but we're not going to get into that in a 101 level class. It's just important to know that the rock essentially is what secures the membrane and the insulation over the deck. And then there's mechanically fastened systems, and that is where fasteners and plates in the seam of the roof, or in the seams, excuse me, are what secure the membrane in place. So that's why we refer to that. Again, the membrane is secured by fasteners and plates, so we refer to it as a mechanically fastened system. There's no adhesive in the field of the roof in the flat area on that type of a system. So just getting a general understanding of those will help us. And then this is just to lead into really roof decks and the fact that all roofs really have a deck. So the deck is essentially the structural component upon which our insulation and the membrane is applied or installed. So there are different types of decks out there. You have steel, there is concrete, wood. These are just a few, but these are quite common. There also is different types of wood, just as an example. There's others that are not listed on this slide that are approved decks that basically we make fasteners, or excuse me, we sell fasteners for various deck types, essentially. So it's not a one glove fits all sizes when it comes to decks, when it comes to fasteners. So you do need to make sure it's the appropriate fastener for the appropriate deck, and that's something we're not going to get too in depth with on a 101 level course either. But just to mention it. And then we also make adhesive, which is essentially insulation adhesive that can be used to secure insulation to various deck types as well. It can also be used to secure insulation to other layers of insulation too. So just some examples here of decks, and we'll get into more, we'll get more into the insulation adhesive because that's a big part of this webinar later on in the slide. So right here, what we see is three very common types of insulations that you may see on our systems. And before I get into these, actually, real quick, I do want to just reference really what insulation does for people looking for a basic understanding. And the answer to that is primarily it provides R value, which is really thermal resistance. And it can also, excuse me, when I say thermal resistance, I should really describe that. That essentially means, you know, the ability to keep the warm air in the building, for example, during cold months, and vice versa, keep the cool air in during the warm months or the hotter months. So it can also give an adequate substrate, meaning really the surface upon which the membrane is to be installed. Okay. And then often with insulation, I think it's important to note that there's often more than one layer, and that's really considered good roofing practice for us. And then with commercial roof insulations, they most commonly are going to come either 4-foot by 8-foot boards or 4-foot by 4-foot boards. There are some exceptions to the rule with that, but that's generally what they're going to come in. And then they oftentimes are going to have different thicknesses. So the thicker the board is of the same type of insulation, for example, the higher the R value. So they don't all come in different thicknesses, but many do. So Carlisle also sells various types of insulation outside of these. Like I said, these are just some common ones, and I want to start with these for that reason. Part of the reason that these are common is that they can all be adhered to with membrane adhesive. So bonding adhesive is another term you may use that, or excuse me, you may hear that used. So insulation adhesive, for example, will work on really just about any of our insulations that we have, but membrane adhesive, for example, does not work on all of our types of insulation, for example. And we'll talk about some of those in the following slide. But then another key part of these is these provide good R value in terms of their thickness, basically. So if you look at the Insulbase polyiso, the very far left-hand image, that is basically a glass reinforced felt facer on top of that, call it a closed cell foam core. And again, polyiso provides very good R value, excuse me, in terms of its thickness. And then the Secure Shield is also a polyiso product, essentially. So the closed cell foam core is really the same between the Secure Shield and the Insulbase. So then the difference is basically the facer that's on top. So it's which is on top and bottom really, it's a coated glass facer on the Secure Shield versus a glass reinforced felt facer on the Insulbase polyiso. And what that really translates to is that the coated glass facer is really an upgrade. It's it's essentially a stronger facer. It's gonna resist moisture better than the glass reinforced felt facer on the Insulbase, for example. And then of course, there's the Secure Shield. That is a polyiso product as well, but it's a denser product essentially. You can see the PSI compression strength on that is 109 versus 20 or 25 PSI that you can get either the Insulbase or the Secure Shield polyisos in. And so what that partly translates to is a more durable board on the roof, for example. It's going to withstand foot traffic a little bit better. It's going to withstand hail as well. So generally you'll hear that referred to as a cover board. And when we say a cover board, generally reference that in terms of if there's multiple layers of insulation, we would use this as the top layer, again, for that durability, good hail performance, things of that nature. So just a couple of examples here. And I would actually say, going back real quick, it's safe to say really that The insole-based polyiso and secure shield, those are common enough insulations. I'd say really on most of our roofs, you're going to see one of those used as at least one of the layers of insulation. It's not always going to be the case, but quite often. So right here, this gives a couple more options really that we sell. So there's the polyiso that I already talked about in the last slide, and then there's the so I'm not going to go over that one again, but there's channel dry EPS. EPS stands for expanded polystyrene, and that is essentially a styrofoam is what that comes down to. And what the channel dry is it's basically the solution to concrete where moisture is potentially still a concern. So this product can be installed directly on top of structural concrete, for example, or on top of concrete within its cure time or after its cure time. So cure time is really known as 28 days, but the issue is there's no guarantee after 28 days, for example. That's not to say that the concrete is dry enough to be roofed over top of, to the extent that there's not going to be moisture concerns either in the building or to the roof system itself. So that's a big animal in the industry as far as when concrete is really dry enough to be roofed over top of. There's always the question of if it's dry and then it rains, you know, how long until it's actually dry enough. So this product can be installed really with either fasteners and plates into the deck, or as long as it's a structural concrete or a lightweight structural concrete deck, I should say, or it can be installed with our flexible fast adhesive. So that's a big game changer with it. We actually recently announced that the flexible fast can be used, and these vents or these grids that you see in this product, kind of point to these, those basically allow, that's what's going to go or come in contact with the deck, and that allows moisture basically to channel its way through those vents and basically go through vents that are installed with this actual product. So there's actually 1- and 2-way relief vents that get installed every so many square feet. You're talking 2,000 square feet for these vents that actually get installed that help to basically release that moisture in the concrete. So the other one that we have here is extruded polystyrene. I'm going to actually skip over that one real quick and go to the expanded polystyrene. That product, the reason I'm starting with this one is this is made from the same styrofoam material as the EPS, and we make EPS, by the way. So this particular product, I would say that main benefits are you can basically get it in good compression strengths. It's lightweight. I should say it's available in good compression. Lightweight. It's got good moisture resistance, and often it's used as a flute fill material. So you can actually get this custom cut, for example, to fill inside of flutes on like metal retrofit jobs. So if you have a metal retrofit roof, so that would be like a standing seam panel roof, we can actually have these custom cut to fill in between those panels. And that really needs to be done on metal retrofit jobs for them to be completed properly. The other one we see here is fanfold. That is that bottom middle image. Excuse me. And that particular product is also an EPS. It's an expanded polystyrene, but it folds out like an accordion. It's actually 50-foot lengths, and each little board within that 50-foot length is basically a 2-foot by 4-foot long board, and it's very easy, very lightweight to handle. You can use it on mechanically fastened systems, but you have to be careful. There's some guidelines to follow if it's being used with like PVC or EPDM, for example. Generally, we probably see that used more often is going to be like ballast recover jobs. So that would be where on a ballast roof, for example, they may just reuse the ballast that's already there. They could scoot it aside, for example, scoot the ballast aside, apply a layer of the fan fold over top of the existing roof. That way they have a fresh layer of insulation to then apply the new the new membrane over top of this fan fold product. And then they would obviously put the ballast into place at the proper rate. So again, we're not going to get into those rates for this this type of a webinar, but it's a common one that you would see this product used on. So Secure Shield Composite, that is just a example of a, we offer multiple composite boards with different options, I should say, but this particular one is essentially our Secure Shield board that I showed in the last slide, the one that was 20 to, or you could get it in 25 PSI strength, and it's pre-laminated to the Secure Shield HD. So if you're adhering insulation, for example, you got 2 layers, this could save the time of actually adhering those together in the field, for example. And again, you get that benefit of a cover board as the top layer, for example. One thing that I want to point out with the fan fold, the expanded polystyrene, and the channel dragon, those are all expanded polystyrene products. You cannot adhere to those with membrane adhesive. So I kind of alluded to that in the last few slides, I think. Insulation adhesive, so the flexible fast adhesive that we'll talk about, can be used on these boards, but membrane adhesive to bond membrane to the insulation, not compatible, or you can't really use it with these boards. So what you could do if you had an adhered system is you could install these boards, and then you could use the flexible fast to adhere a appropriate insulation board over top of them, or mechanically fasten an appropriate insulation board over top of them that could then be, assuming that that board, of course, could then be adhered to with membrane adhesive. So just kind of giving you the options that you may run into. And then extruded polystyrene, I didn't really go over that one too much. That's just, it's another type of styrofoam. We don't really manufacture it, but it also is, it's lightweight, it's durable. It does have a good compression strength and good moisture resistance. So you might see that one under paver systems, for example, where they'll use pavers as the ballast. So as long as the pavers are heavy enough, we have that in our specifications, how heavy they would need to be, but the pavers themselves can essentially act as the weight to hold down the membrane and the insulation. So tends to be a common one in those type of scenarios. If we move over here, these are some of the new kids on the block with our installations that we have. Some of them have been out for a little while now, but these are generally newer ones that you'll see. The InsulBase HD, that is it's essentially a polyiso high density board, so it's 80 PSI on that one. That is made specifically for mechanically fastened systems. So you don't want to use that on adhered roofs as the top layer. We also don't really want to see it under ballast roofs because it's too hard of an insulation between the membrane and the ballast, and it can create a puncture point. So I'll talk about that more later on, but specifically mechanically fastened systems, you can use that board, and you get basically the benefit of a good cover board, essentially, due to durability, with a very good cost. And then there's the Optimar. So the Optimar is a vacuum seal insulated, the vacuum insulated panel, basically. So it's vacuum sealed, and it's basically sealing in a lot of R value is what it really comes down to. But the thing with this insulation, it cannot be cut or punctured, basically. So what that translates to is areas where there's like walls, or if there's roof penetrations, anything like that. Those areas need to be infilled with, like, for example, a polyiso insulation, because you're going to have to obviously make cuts to cut to size when you get into those areas. So we actually needs to be like a roof drawing that's submitted when you're using this Optimar product, in order to make sure that we can get a good basically drawing showing where the pieces need to go and how to lay things out. Really what this is, it's the solution to achieving a lot of R value in a thin panel, because if you have a roof, let's say, with, just as an example, windows, that aren't too far off the deck. In that scenario, let's say that the owner wants a higher R value than a lot of other insulations can provide up to that thickness. You're kind of out of options, So this product, you get a lot of insulation in a very thin panel. The other thing, though, to mention with it is it does need to be used in conjunction with our Secure Shield HD. So you would actually, we state to adhere the Secure Shield HD to this panel with flexible fast adhesive on each side. So this Optimar panel actually gets sandwiched in between. And then you can either, then you would adhere that to the, so you'd have, again, 2 layers of Secure Shield HD, this Optimar panel in between, and then you would have to adhere the Secure Shield, the bottom layer of Secure Shield would need to be either adhered really to the deck, or you could mechanically fasten that bottom layer of Secure Shield HD to the deck and then adhere the Optimar to it would be another option. And then of course the top layer, as I said, gets adhered to the Optimar. But that's the way it's installed. So it really comes out, because you have those 2 layers of Secure Shield HD with it, it comes out to be 2.6 inches thick. But if it's all installed properly, you basically got an R38 value out of this, out of 2.6 inches, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. EcoStorm, that's the one to the right here. That is a basically 1/2 inch thick panel made of really a blend of plastic and cellulose fibers. It's a 3990 PSI is the compression strength on that. So very, very durable cover board, to say the least. Basically, you've also got a lot of moisture resistance on this one too, and then great hail resistance. So a couple other big benefits with this board. You can adhere membrane to it, or you can do a mechanically fastened system over top of it as well. So just a couple options there. But it is so dense and so durable that you're not going to be able to use a utility knife to cut this product. So you'll need a circular saw essentially to cut the EcoStorm product. So moving on here, we're going to move more into installation methods. So we kind of talked a little bit about the insulation itself, but now for the 2 methods, you really have mechanical securement, which is done via fasteners and plates, or you have adhered insulation, which you could use our flexible fast for, okay? And we'll talk about these different methods in the following slides. So I want to talk about real quick, though, if you were mechanically fastening insulation, the different plates that you would utilize. So there's the 3-inch insulation plate I'm going to cover first. And I'm going to cover that because it's a very common plate that you would see. It's common because of affordability and the fact that it works with various fasteners to go into different deck types. So basically, we have fasteners with that plate that you can use to fasten insulation into either steel, wood, or concrete, for example. The HP ASAP plate, that is a pre-assembled plate and fastener, for example. So the fastener and plate already come pre-assembled, and that can save the installer time, obviously, to take those fasteners and insert them into the plate, which might not sound like a lot, but you got to think of roofs with thousands of these, basically. And so every little bit can count and start to boost productivity. The AccuTrack plate that you see on the far left, that is basically made for a particular tool. It's called the AccuTrack tool. And that tool is a stand-up mechanism that basically you load these plates into it like you would, you load these plates into them in a stack. So quite a few plates fit into it. And then you would load the fastener into essentially a barrel with this mechanism. And you can actually stand up and fasten the fastener through this plate into the deck below. So it's a pretty easy install. For somebody who knows how to use it, it can be a very quick install, or they can really crank out some fasteners and plates. You're also not bending over, to fasten them down, which is kind of nice. But yeah, you got to have somebody who knows how to work it without jamming it too. That's the other thing with that tool. So we don't manufacture the AccuTrack tool, but that whole thing is an option. And then there's the Secure Fast plate that we see on the far right. Right now, I'd say the main area that you're going to see that particular plate used, or the main reason for that plate would be with our SAT EPDM membrane. So that is a peel and stick, essentially EPDM membrane, where there's a release liner on the back of it. And basically there's multiple ways to remove that release liner, but once you remove it, once you remove it, it'll essentially adhere to the substrate below it, as long as it's a acceptable substrate. And there's too many options there. We're not going to get into every single one that's acceptable and every one that's not, but Secure Shield, just for example, would be a acceptable substrate or insulation to adhere to. The reason we want to see the Secure Fast plate with the EPDM SAT membrane is a little bit of oil residue on like this 3-inch insulation plate that we see over here. And we find that that does not work well with the bond when it comes to the SAT EPDM membrane. So we like to see the Secure Fast plate due to that reason. And then this slide is to talk about insulation placement and really securement. So we'll talk about the one on the left first. That is basically what you can see. They got multiple layers, and we always recommend staggering the boards of insulation. When I say staggering, I'm talking about actually staggering the joints so that the joints don't line right up on top of each other. And there's really two reasons for that. So first one being that if the joints are right on top of each other, you're going to lose some R value, right? Because you've just got a straight path for any cool air or hot air, whatever it is you're trying to combat, to go through those joints and essentially basically escape the system. Every little bit counts for sure. And then you've also got interior moisture that can be an issue as well. So if you don't stagger those joints, for example, everybody thinks about everybody thinks about moisture as water coming from above the roofing membrane. That is not the only place that moisture is a concern. Moisture can absolutely be a concern from inside the building as well. So if you think about it, any interior moisture inside that building can get into the system. And staggering those joints in the boards basically gives that moisture a more difficult path to channel its way through the system. Just the same way it gives air, for example, that wants to escape and potentially lose R value, an easier path to escape the system. So that's why staggering the joints is definitely something we would want to see. Max joint gap too, we say no joints greater than 1/4 of an inch as far as the gap between the boards. So another one to keep in mind there. And then the slide to the right here, that's basically, that's showing the insulation securement via fasteners and plates. So it's important to note that only the top layer needs to be attached with fasteners and plates when you're securing the insulation via that method. So you don't need to actually use fasteners and plates on every single layer. The top layer itself, by having that fastener and plate there, that fastener will go through the layers underneath of it and it will secure to the deck. So top layer is going to hold all the layers below it down, as long as that fastener obviously hits the deck. So insulation adhesive is a little bit different, right? So if you have multiple layers of adhesive adhering the insulation together, each subsequent layer is going to have to be adhered together. So we'll talk about that one. And again, I'm still yet to talk about why insulation adhesive over fasteners and plates. So we'll get to that. But here in this slide, we're showing basically an example of mechanically fastening the insulation on an adhered system. So again, we call the system name based on the way that the membrane is secured or attached. So even though in this example the insulation is secured via fasteners and plates, if the membrane is adhered with bonding adhesive, we refer to that as a adhered system. On adhered systems, you're generally going to see more fasteners and plates than on a mechanically fastened membrane system. So that would be the alternative, the alternative of if the membrane was secured with fasteners and plates in lieu of bonding adhesive. So the reason you're going to see more generally on a adhered system is because if you think about it, on an adhered system, that membrane is only as secure as the insulation itself is. So if that insulation starts to have any issues at all, it's just going to be more likely to carry through to the membrane itself. So this right here, the picture to the left-hand side, that shows just an image of a detail of how we would specify where the fasteners and plates be located on a board, for example. Top one's a 4x8 board, lower one's a 4x4 board. But basically, we don't just want, let's say a roofer hears that they need 16 fasteners and plates per 4x8 board. And that, if you look at this image, that's what's on that top 4x8 board there. We don't just want the roofer installing them wherever they think 16 fasteners and plates should go. We have details basically to reference where those should be located. And those are based on performance and testing that we've done. So a lot of different fastening patterns for adhered systems and a lot of different variables as far as how many how many fasteners and plates you would need for the insulation. So we're not going to get into all those variables on a 101 level class, but just to kind of cover the basics of it. Right here, this is just a brief video we'll show of a roof being installed. This is going to show an adhered system. So you'll see in this slide, we're staggering the joints and the boards, just like what I said. Again, that helps with R value, and thermal resistance would be what that translates to, and then also interior moisture inside the building. And then we're only fastening the very top layer. So you can see we're down to 8 fasteners and plates per 4x8 board on this example. That's a pretty low amount for an adhered system, but there are adhered systems where we accept 8 fasteners and plates per 4x8 board. So anyway, you'll see here, they're going to apply their bonding adhesive. There's different adhesives out there, lots to talk about. We're not going to get into that. We're not really going to get into how they're applying this either. That's more, we'll talk about that more on a EPDM 101 course that we have coming up actually. So anyway, just to get an idea, more for the insulation attachment in regards to this type of system. And then right here, this shows a insulation and cover board attachment on a mechanically fastened system. So you can see they're down to 6 fasteners and plates per 4x8 board on this kind of a system. So generally on mechanically fastened systems, I was saying in I think 2 or 3 slides back that there's less fasteners and plates than on a adhered system. And the reason for that, you can kind of see it right here. The membrane is attached separately from the insulation itself or independently. So it's not to say we don't want the insulation. The insulation still needs to be secured. We certainly can't have it cup or bridge or bow too bad, but because the membrane is secured independently, you're going to see less fasteners and plates generally on these type of systems. And then these are basically the 3 fastening patterns that we have for insulation attachment on mechanically fastened systems. I don't show them for adhered because there's just too many different ones to even show, but it's pretty simple when it comes to mechanically fastened. But there are different variables as far as which one you would need, as far as if you need like 8 per board on the image to the far right, or if you need 6 per board, or if you need 4 per board. That's going to depend on warranty length. It's going to depend on, for example, whether it's a new roof or a re-roof, for example, like a recover, where there's the roofer would install insulation over the existing system. So different variables can dictate how many of these you need. So, or how many fasteners and plates you need, I should say, per 4x8 board. This video right here will show us essentially just a brief video of a mechanically fastened system. We're going to mainly focus on the insulation. So some of this is a little bit of a repeat from the adhered system video that we showed you. But the one thing to really point out is that they're only using 4 fasteners and plates per 4x8 board. So there are some scenarios that you can use only 4 fasteners and plates per 4x8 board on a mechanically fastened system. That is not to say that's not every scenario, but there's options. We're not going to get into how to find those in this either. That's not a what I would consider a 101 level course material, but just to know that there are those different options out there. And then we'll talk more about what they're doing with the seams and everything in the EPDM 101 course that we have coming up. We can talk about what they're doing there. So I want to focus more on the insulation attachment for this particular webinar. And then if we move on, this is our insulation adhesive. So this is essentially, all of these are just different sizes of containers that it comes in. And these are, this is our flexible fast. And this comes in basically a part A and part B mixture. So every single one of these options is going to have a part A component and a part B component. And it really relies on that mixture between the two to get the strength that it needs and to actually really adhere to whatever substrate it's contacting. So basically the dual tanks, focus a little bit on those. Those are one of our more common, I'd say really the most common one that we sell out there. One, because they come with all the pieces and parts basically with each set of dual tanks. You've got the tips, you've got the hose, everything you need for them, and they're easy to dispose as well. As you can see in the middle slide, there's some other options. Some of these bigger containers, you're going to need like paste carts, and when you get to like especially like these 50-gallon drums, pretty heavy-duty equipment to utilize something that size. So most roofers don't have equipment to basically run something like the size of the 50-gallon drums, but they certainly are out there. And then this right here, assuming you're not a roofer who has that heavier duty equipment that I was talking about, which again I don't think most do. This is generally how this insulation adhesive would be applied, is in ribbons, like what we see in both the image and then in the detail images to the left. So basically, you can see our bead spacing patterns that we call for is 12, 6, and 4-inch on center bead spacing. And basically, you think obviously the lesser the bead spacing, the more adhesive you're using. So on higher warranties, for example, longer duration warranties, higher wind speed warranties, we're going to obviously require tighter bead spacing. So, but these are really the three options. Now, if you do have some of that heavier duty equipment that I was talking about in the last slide, like there's one called a Predator rig, just for example, that you can use with those 50-gallon drums. That will spray, that has heated equipment, and that can spray that adhesive more in a full coverage to actually fully cover whatever substrate it's going on to. So it's not going to look like these beads that you see right here. But most roofers, like I said, this is the application they're going to use because that's what they have to work with. So moving on to this slide. Now, before I talk about this one too in depth, I want to talk about the insulation adhesive. Actually, a couple things that I didn't mention before. So why use, insulation adhesive, flexible fast adhesive over like fasteners and plates? And, a couple different reasons. It's not going to be nearly as loud, for example, as if you're drilling into a deck. And it can go a lot easier on certain deck types. I mean, you think about structural concrete, for example, with rebar in there. It can be a lot easier to use just the flexible fast adhesive to adhere the insulation over that deck. And then also, if the insulation gets built up so high, for example, you start to run into issues potentially with fastener length. So that's another scenario. And then also helps with R value. So number of different reasons why the flexible fast adhesive is really growing in popularity. We're seeing a lot more of it. To talk about a couple of the things that need to go right with this adhesive, I can't cover them all, but I want to talk about really the big ones. And the two main ones I would say are proper temperature upon application. So this adhesive needs to be over 70 degrees during application. So it can actually be applied down to 25 degrees, but the adhesive itself needs to be kept over 70. And I think a lot of people hear that and they say, well, how does that work? An example would be like the dual tanks. There's different methods to heat different containers, but like the dual tanks, for example, that I was talking about, I think in the previous slide or two, we actually sell hot blankets, for example, or what they're called, or excuse me, power blankets, are really what I should call them. And those are heating blankets that can actually wrap around those cylinders or those tanks, and they can be plugged in and actually keep that adhesive warm upon application. The important thing to note there is that those are really just to keep or to maintain the adhesive's temperature. They're not meant to bring it up from a cold temperature to heat. So an example would be if those tanks get really cold, which we really don't want to begin with. We like it to be stored, really room temperature, for example, in a warmer environment. But if they get cold, they should be warmed back up in a warm environment, and then the power blanket's used to maintain that heat. It takes a really long time if those tanks get cold for those power blankets to actually bring it up to the heat that we want it to be at, which is over 70 degrees. The other thing that needs to be checked for with this adhesive when it's applied is what's called string time. And what that is essentially the window of time to know when the adhesive is ready for the insulation boards to be placed into it. So if you were to take, and we want the roofers doing this, if you were to take a latex glove, like what he's got on in the picture, and dip your fingers into the adhesive, you should see strings developing between your fingers as you separate them. That's what we're referring to as string time. If it's wet when you separate your fingers, then it's too wet. It's not, it hasn't waited long enough. And if it's too dry or clumpy, then it's basically over dry. We're not going to talk about how to correct situations like that in this. That would be getting into the weeds a little bit on a 101 course, but basically that string time again is just, that is the window that needs to be achieved for this to be ready for those boards to be placed into it. We say as a guideline that it generally happens between 1.5 to 2 minutes after application, but that is a guide. We still state that that the roofer should check for, really needs to check for string time with this product. So once that string time is met, they can place the boards into the adhesive. And this, by the way, is an example of adhesive applied with heated equipment. You can see how that covers the whole deck area. It's not in beads or ribbons like the last one. So some pretty beefy equipment they used for this particular application that you would see in the picture. But anyway, going back to what I was talking about, once the string time is met, you place the board into the adhesive, and first you want to walk on it. After you walk on it, you want to take a segmented weighted roller, 150 pounds, we say, to roll over top of that board. And the reason that you walk on it first is because if you take that roller over that board too soon and start rolling before you've walked on it, it can actually cause that board to shuffle around a little bit. And that's not good for the adhesive, for the strength of it long term, and it's not good for the fact that a lot of times you can get gaps in the boards greater than 1/4 inch as well. So anyway, after you've walked on them, you really immediately come back and roll it with a 150-pound weighted roller. And we do say segmented weighted roller. So if you look at this roller in the picture, it's in segments. You can see a segment here. It's tough to see on the slide. There's actually 4 segments it's in. So what a lot of roofers may do is there's basically rollers that are solid pieces that you can either fill with like sand or water, for example. And the problem with those is if you have sloped areas, for example, they'll apply all the pressure just on one side of that sloped area. So they're not going to get even pressure across the entire roller. The fact that the roller's on segments like that, it's designed to really provide even pressure, even in sloped areas, so that it's really sandwiching that board down evenly into that insulation adhesive. So just a number of things like you can see to talk about with this. Now, securement with ballast is very, very simple, really simple. The ballast or the rock in this case does it all. So it actually, the weight of it secures both the membrane and the insulation. Now with ballast systems though, we don't like to see hard boards or like really dense boards as the top layer of insulation, for example. We want to see softer boards, so like something 20 to 25 psi, like the Secure Shield or the Polyiso, for example, would be fine. But you get up to like Secure Shield HD, you know, that 109 psi, Something like that we generally don't like to see because that hard board creates a puncture point between the membrane and the stone, essentially. So you've got that stone on one side and then you've got that hard board on the other. Like I said, that can create a puncture point. The other thing we don't want to see is fasteners and plates to secure the insulation. Again, the rock really does it all. So fastener and plate basically creates that hard surface again, just like I was talking about with the harder insulation boards, that can essentially cause a puncture point for the membrane. So just a couple of things to talk about there. And then, like I said, in higher level courses, we talk more about like the weight of the ballast, things of that nature. But this is really just to keep it simple with regards to the securement of the insulation itself. Now, I did want to point to this slide that we see right here. So this is basically the registration page, basically, that you should have received via email to register for these courses. So obviously, this is the Insulation 101. We have a live webinar still yet coming up for the EPDM 101 and then for TPO and PVC 101 the week after. We are working on a landing page basically for additional courses that we're hoping to add. In fact, there's already been a couple of additional ones that we're adding. So basically, Brian Chamberlain is going to be teaching those. He is our senior project analyst. So those get kind of more into design, but they're great courses to take. Whereas these are more basic here. Like I said, we're working on a landing page, and then we're going to get some recorded webinars hopefully on there sooner than later too. So you should be getting information as far as like a landing page here. And then that'll also, like I said, a landing page should have information on additional courses that are coming too. I think the last point that I basically want to mention is just to say really thank you for participating in this, and we appreciate it, and I hope to see people at the EPDM 101 and the TPO and PVC 101 that will take place the week after next. So anyway, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.